Hey everybody, welcome to Pop Culture Philosophers. Today we're going to go Heroes Reborn style and talk about Jim Lee's Fantastic Four #1. That's right everybody, thanks for checking out the video. I am Rockin Robbie Billups, and today we're taking a look inside Jim Lee's Fantastic Four #1. This was part of the Heroes Reborn initiative, in which Marvel allowed Jim Lee's Wildstorm Studios and Rob Liefeld's Extreme Studios to take over 4 of their core titles to try to revitalize them. Fantastic Four, Iron Man, that was what Jim Lee did. Avengers and Captain America, that was Rob Liefeld. This is a very infamous time in comic books because Marvel was about to hit bankruptcy. They were trying to do whatever they could to boost some numbers up and generate some excitement into comics. Now, I've recently been listening to episodes of Robservations, which is Rob Liefeld's podcast. There was like a whole 5-episode stretch where he was talking about Heroes Reborn, and it made me drag out these copies and just start flipping through them again. And I wanted to go through these books, and at least every issue #1, I would love to keep going through them. Let me know if you want to see that here on the channel. But I remember this time very vividly. 1996, I'm like 15 years old. I'm still reading comics, and this was a huge launch, a huge deal. Now, halfway through the Heroes Reborn stuff, and we'll talk about this as we go, but halfway through the Heroes Reborn stuff, they outed Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee came in, and it became a kind of just a mini-series event, right? There was always an out that was planned for this. This came right after the Onslaught run, in which during the Onslaught event, it seemed like the Avengers and the Fantastic Four had been killed. Instead, they had been shunted away to a pocket dimension, another reality created by Franklin Richards, where they relived new modernized versions of themselves. So this was an attempt to take Fantastic Four, which was selling around 30 to 35,000 copies a month, and try to bolster that up with a huge name draw of Jim Lee, and it worked. This issue sold over 300,000 copies. I don't know, it's probably one of the higher selling Fantastic Four issues out there. I remember when this came out, it was such a big deal. I'm a huge Fantastic Four fan. I was so in love with the idea that Jim Lee was going to be taking over my favorite comic book, and people were going to pay attention to it. They were going to notice it. But is the book any good? Let's get right into it. Well, I got the variant cover by Brett Booth. I remember getting to the comic shop. I wanted to go day of, but I couldn't make it until the following week, and I couldn't find any of the Jim Lee covers. So I got this Brett Booth cover, but you know, honestly, they're easy to find now. I need to go ahead and grab a copy of that Jim Lee cover. So let's get into the book. It is a retelling of the Fantastic Four's origin, and it's actually pretty decent. So it starts off, Ben Grimm is having a dream about going off into space, and the Fantastic Four are there, you know, Reed and Sue and Johnny, they're hit by some kind of radiation. He has this terrible dream, and then he wakes up from it, and he's actually fallen asleep while in a simulation for this spaceship that Reed Richards is designing. So it's the same kind of concept. The Fantastic Four get sent into space. They get hit by cosmic radiation. They fall back to Earth with superpowers. It's the same kind of jam, but with a lot more details kind of thrown in. Reed is working on this spaceship because there's some kind of space anomaly that's approaching Earth. They're getting some kind of a signal from it. They think it may be intelligent, so he's wanting to have first contact with alien life. He's built this great ship. His best friend is Ben Grimm. He wanted to be an astronaut but got hurt in the Gulf War. See, back in the Kirby and Lee days, it was like World War II, but here it's updated a little bit to the Gulf War, and he's not allowed to be a part of the mission, but he is able to be the simulation pilot and help read out just a bunch of stuff here. Lots of dialogue. It is scripted by Brandon Choi, plotted by Jim Lee. It's very much like what they were doing with Wildcats, but it actually reads more coherently to me than Wildcats, and even though it's kind of a long read and packed with dialogue, it doesn't really feel stiff. It doesn't really ever get stagnant. It doesn't get confusing like some of those early issues of Wildcats can. This one absolutely works. Susan Storm and her brother Johnny, they're part of the Storm Foundation. They're like this corporate company that has a space division that Sue runs. She's got a relationship with Reed. A lot of familiar relationships and character dynamics, but a little bit of just an update, right? Back in the day, Sue was just Reed's like love, like little fling or something, like no real strength behind that character as to why she needed to be here on the mission. Here, though, she has more of an important role. She's making deals, she's wheeling, she's dealing, she's doing all that kind of stuff, and she finds out that this dude from the government, Agent Wyatt Wingfoot, so we get the introduction, a radical reintroduction of Wyatt Wingfoot, who is a Fantastic Four favorite. He shows up and informs Susan that the government, the U.S. government, is taking over the message, or taking over the mission, because the space anomaly has been designated as a threat to national security, and she's, going against this, but he doesn't care. We're still getting into it. Now, the Jim Lee artwork it's all right. It's not the best Jim Lee artwork. We just recently went through his X-Men #1 from 1991, and I do think that the artwork there is a little bit more solid, but here it's just, he doesn't have an opportunity to give us many heroic shots yet, because it's a slow build into the Fantastic Four's origin. And the coloring's by Joe Chiodo and somebody else. Joe Chiodo and Martin Jimenez. And very much like the time. Lots of browns, lots of oranges, kind of muddy. The coloring is probably the weakest part. Now, it does seem like the line work is not quite like it is typically from Scott Williams inking Jim Lee, at least before. Like, if you compare this to Hush, which came out a little bit after, or his X-Men run, which was a little bit before, or even Wildcats, there's something a little bit more dynamic about that artwork. Maybe it's just the idea of the structure of the story, but it doesn't really come across visually as exciting as some other Jim Lee's comics have, but it still, to me, is a really great retelling of the origin of the Fantastic Four, and very much could have been adapted for like a 90s animated movie or a live action movie, or even this whole vibe of what's going on here could work, I think, for the basis of a Fantastic Four movie, where you got the Reed Richards wanting to explore first contact with alien life, and the government's getting involved. Here is our introduction to Johnny Storm. This super expensive car comes up trying to race along with Ben Grimm, and it's Johnny. He's got some chick there with him, and he winds up playing chicken with him. The chick is just freaked out, like, get me out of here. She pulls on the wheel, goes off-road, and Ben Grimm's like, well, I can see that they're all right, so I'm cool, and he can go on. So, but it's all right. Like, it's not super dynamic. It's not super kinetic. And once again, just all the oranges. This was just something they did. Now, Rob Liefeld was saying on his Robservations podcast that at this time, Marvel was hiring the lowest bidder for a coloring house, right? But this isn't those guys. This is Wildstorm, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how the Wildstorm colors compare to the Extreme Studios colors in their books, Avengers and Captain America, on this revisit that I'm doing, because Rob Liefeld was very critical of the orangey and browny coloring that you would get. So Sue shows up, Johnny's there, Ben's there, Reed's there. Reed finds out that they're taking control of his project. He is just furious about it. Wyatt Wingfoot, special agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. S.H.I.E.L.D. is going to be kind of sprung throughout this run, throughout the entire Heroes Reborn. And what really makes it cool is that knowing what's to come, knowing the pieces that fit, Galactus, the Inhumans, Black Panther, Doctor Doom, all these little subplots and teases are able to be kind of spread throughout, starting from the very early issues, and character conflicts and different elements of the story. Like here we got our first appearance of Doctor Doom. Now, one of the best things about Jim Lee's Fantastic Four is his Doctor Doom. It is amazing. But Wyatt Wingfoot has completely taken over the mission. He has to have Johnny and Susan use their codes, or their handprints, I should say, to launch the mission. And then he takes them out, sends them to the brig, and it's revealed that he's actually working for Doctor Doom. And now, as a reader, we're not supposed to know necessarily what this is, but we know, and they're totally playing on it. Here are some of my favorite panels in this issue. I love that shot of Wyatt. I love that little glimpse of Doctor Doom. I remember it being such a big deal that Jim Lee drew the outside of his eyes so you could tell that he was so mangled and scarred. I thought that was so cool. So many people did. So you got Reed and you got Ben. They're in the brig or the little jailhouse or whatever, right? And they get this idea that they can escape and take the prototype. So the main ship is being commandeered by Agent Wyatt Wingfoot under orders of Doctor Doom to explore this space anomaly for himself. But there's a prototype ship that doesn't have as much shielding, that doesn't have as much bells and whistles on it, but maybe they can somehow escape and they can intercept the mission and then the anomaly with the prototype ship. As they're leading Johnny and Susan, they distract the agents with his car alarm. Car alarms were, pretty big deal back in the day. If you had one, it was a significant thing. So they fight off these agents. I love this little, there's a little line right here. It's about time those kickboxing moves you taught me finally paid off. Okay, sure, that's fine. But they're kicking ass. They're badass already. They go, they save Ben, they save Reed. Nice little touching moment. They put on their spacesuits, and they're going to go off, and they're going to take this prototype ship, and they're going to launch, and that's what's happening here. Typical Jim Lee-isms right here, but I just loved how they kind of stretched this story out, gave it a little bit more room to breathe. It's kind of done really quickly in the Kirby and Lee issue, and then they get right into the Mole Man stuff. But here they're able to actually set up some stuff. It's intriguing. It feels modern. It feels like an update. And even at the time, the coloring worked because we were more transfixed with the computer coloring and the molding and shading that they could do, like on the clouds right there. But in hindsight, it does kind of not work, but in certain elements it does work. That's a cool page. That green really pops off that background, but the ship is a little dark and murky, so maybe it could have been done a little bit differently. So all these ships, there are other people there as well. That's a mystery. They get to this anomaly. They got these crazy readings, and it's some kind of a language that Reed is picking up. And then here's some really cool, I don't know, usually I'm expecting more Scott Williams typical kind of hatching and stuff, but it's different. Definitely a style change, a little bit simpler. Right here, it's not explicitly told to us yet, but that is the Silver Surfer. He is the anomaly. He is sending out some kind of a signal. Doom has already mentioned that he needs to stop the Harbinger. We know as Fantastic Four fans that Galactus is going to be on the horizon here. So that's kind of what they're setting up. They're tying in the Herald of Galactus, Silver Surfer, and Galactus' arrival. They're tying it in with the Fantastic Four's origin because Doom's people are dropping nukes on the space anomaly. The space anomaly, which we know as Silver Surfer, unleashes this giant cosmic energy as well as the nukes going off, and that is what causes the cosmic radiation that starts bombarding the Fantastic Four, causing them to change. Their ship is about to just burn up on re-entry in the atmosphere. Wyatt Wingfoot finds out that they're probably dead. It's all good. They crash land on an island in the Caribbean, and then here we have it. Johnny Storm, he's on fire. He's the Human Torch. Now, if you look at the touches on the lettering, Johnny, when he's flamed on, he's got this cool lettering with the flames on it. They started that on Fantastic Four a few issues before this, right before the Onslaught stuff, where they brought in Carlos Pacheco and kind of revitalized that book for just a couple months before this. Then he finds Reed. Reed's all stretchy. He pieces together that they must have somehow mutated their biomolecular structure with the radiation between the nuclear bomb and the energy source, the cosmic energy source. So they're going to go try to find Ben and Sue. Ben starts changing into the Thing, and we're about to get to one of my favorite pages, especially as a kid, because it has some sexiness to it, but also just a really great money shot of the Thing, right? The first shot we get of the Thing. But Sue wakes up. She sees that the core, the quantum drive is what they have. It has somehow come along with them on their escape pod, and it's leaking energy, right? And so she then finds Ben Grimm, the Thing. This is such a cool image of the Thing. I was enamored by this. And also when I was a kid, I was very much enamored by this slightly pornographic kind of look at Susan Storm. Very sexy, very obvious what's going on there. But, you know, I digress. That shot of the Thing is absolutely stunning. I love the green and the purple here. This is an element of the coloring that I do think I do think works in this part. They, all of a sudden, something shows up. They get captured. Reed and Johnny can hear them, so they're going to go look for them. And Reed is noticing that there's markings on these pillars that are just like the signal that they were getting. This is one of the 2 places on Earth that are connected, somehow linked to this anomaly, right? So very convenient that they landed here. This crazy monster shows up, coming after Susan. Sue and Ben are tied on this pillar. Ben breaks out, starts fighting this monster, says it's clobbering time for the first time. Then the Fantastic Four unite. There's not too much, like, what's going on with this yet, because they're just kind of thrown into this. And then there is the Quantum Core, and here we have the appearance of their first villain, the Mole Man. The Mole Man shows up, and he is somehow linked in with everything that's going on, because he says, I am the Mole Man, and by the will of the Great One I now possess the power with which to bring all of mankind to its knees, and today the 4 of you shall serve as an example of what happens to those who dare stand in my way. So it's definitely here at the end where you start getting some of the energy that you're accustomed to from Jim Lee, and then a bunch of stuff in the back ads, but that page right there, that's a big page. And then, of course, the other one is the reveal of the Thing and Susan Storm's ass, which is right there. Really solid, cool stuff. When I was reading this, when it was coming out, I loved it. I loved that it was kind of a blockbuster approach to one of my favorite titles that had not really had a lot of, I don't know, like a lot of spotlight and shine put on them in recent years. Now, I'm a big fan of the Tom DeFalco and Paul Ryan run. That's what precedes this. But I gotta admit, as much as I love that run, as much as that's very classic Fantastic Four, this was still exciting to read. I liked the updates. I think that this whole series is probably the best of the Heroes Reborn stuff, but that's also because I'm a huge Fantastic Four fan, and I love how they just thread in Galactus and the Inhumans and Doctor Doom and the origin of the Fantastic Four, and it's all tied in together from the very beginning. It feels very 90s. It felt very fresh at the time. Today, obviously, it's got its Lee-isms, it's got its 90s-isms. It's still exciting, though. I still really much enjoyed this comic book and enjoying it. And look at that comic book code, totally approving that Sue image. But yeah, look, baseball cards. But I don't know, I really like it. My biggest thing about it is it's the coloring, but towards the end, I feel like the work is stronger at the end, artistically and coloring-wise. It starts getting better. Now, there are 2 colorists mentioned here, so I don't know how that work was split. Joe Chiodo, I remember him from doing these very sexy pinup-y art cards that my friend's stepdad had. But I don't know. I really still enjoyed this, and I would love to go through and revisit it. It all leads up to the coming of Galactus, which is what ends year 1. Now, it's interesting to know that when this book, or when Heroes Reborn was first considered, like Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld, according to Liefeld, they each got $3 million, complete autonomy, and I've read some of my wizards from this era to hear what they were saying, and according to Rob Liefeld, this was meant to go on for a minute. Like, if it was successful, they wanted to do a year 2, but that all kind of falls apart pretty quickly. When this was announced, there were a lot of people that weren't happy about it, whether they were fans or whether they were creators. Some creators were, I guess, cautiously optimistic, but a lot of creators just shat all over it. They just really thought it was sad that Marvel was going back to Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld. Other people thought it was sad that Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee were going back to Marvel. But they got paid a lot of money to do this, and it was an opportunity to relaunch some of the core Marvel titles that had been not very popular, especially since the rise of the X-Men and Spidey and the coming of the Image guys like Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri, Todd McFarlane, Eric Larson. That was all Spidey and X-Men stuff. So the Fantastic Four needed a shine put on them. And this was the #1 selling book the month it came out, September 1996. I remember it well. I'm glad to revisit it. I would love to revisit issue 2. Let me know if you want to see that. But before that, we're going to get to the next released #1 from Heroes Reborn. That's Captain America by Rob Liefeld. And that's going to be an interesting video to record, an interesting book to revisit, because that was one I really liked at the time. It was probably the first Rob Liefeld book I really enjoyed. But Jim Lee, at this time, was my favorite Image founder and creator, and I was all over this book. Brett Booth on the cover. Here on the variant cover, he is the artist on the second part of the series. Anyway, there's Fantastic Four #1. What do you think? What do you remember about Heroes Reborn, about Jim Lee's Fantastic Four? Let us know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for checking out the video. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and join us over at patreon.com/PCP if you want to help support the channel. I've been Rockin Robbie Billups. Thanks for rocking with us. Keep on reading, y'all. Station.